The claim that I am addressing today is that raising minimum wage will result in unemployment. The advocate's secondary claims were that small businesses will hire fewer people, small businesses will close or decline, and that entry-level jobs will be more difficult to obtain. So on the first point that small businesses will hire fewer people, I did some research and it turns out actually that businesses start turning towards hiring more part-time people instead of full-time employees, which actually results in their ability to hire more total people necessary to cover the same amount of hours of operation or meet the same demand. This means unemployment would technically decrease, not increase. In a 7-year study of states that have passed raising minimum wage, it was found that 68% of overall employment increased after minimum wage was increased. In the retail sector, for example, it was even higher with a 73% rise. Democratic Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland even came out and said on an interview with Fox News on the topic of raising minimum wage, every time we've increased minimum wage, we've seen a growth in jobs, not a loss of jobs. PolitiFact and many other fact-checking sites went extensively to try and prove him wrong, and they could not conclusively show that that was false. The other subpoint the advocate makes for this is that poverty would increase. This is also not exactly accurate. The Congressional Budget Office states that raising minimum wage to $10.10 that Obama had suggested would actually bring 900,000 people out of poverty. That means poverty would decrease. The second main point the advocate makes is that small businesses will close or decline. So it turns out economists across the board agree that if people have more money in their pocket, they have more money to spend, which means that money is going right back into boosting our economy. In turn, with increased spending, there is a higher demand for goods and services, which creates more jobs, which would eventually reduce unemployment. A second study that I found shows that when people are not worried about missing bills or living paycheck to paycheck, their mental health and likelihood to take risks increases. With this, it could be taken that someone would be more likely to open their own business or invest in something they normally wouldn't, like a neighborhood small business. It was also shown that workers will stay with current employers longer since they would be more satisfied with their pay or could live off their wage instead of needing to seek out higher paying jobs out of necessity. This would lower turnover for small businesses, actually decreasing stress on their company, so they would have more availability to focus on improving the company as a whole, not just needing to keep the doors open. The advocate's final point is that entry-level jobs will be more difficult to obtain because they would want people with even more experience if they're having to pay them more. The fact is that employers will always choose the most qualified candidate for a job. It doesn't matter what the pay is. If there's someone with experience with that particular job next to someone without experience, the person with experience will get the job. If all people interviewing are lacking experience, the one with a degree is the most likely to get the job over the one who doesn't. The advocate said in his speech it would be harder for companies to hire us after college because companies would have to pay minimum wage employees more. That doesn't exactly explain why raising minimum wage would affect us as college students any differently than anybody else. In fact, it would benefit us because having our college education would make us a more desirable candidate, and we would be getting paid more money than we would have been at a lower minimum wage. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only 1% of minimum wage workers have a college degree. They go further to highlight that the majority of people in minimum wage jobs are people with high school diploma or less. So hypothetically, even if minimum wage increased and a college graduate was looking for a minimum wage job, he would be more likely to get the job and get paid more than he or she would have if they were to try and get a minimum wage job now. If we didn't believe having a college degree would boost our likelihood of getting hired, we wouldn't be putting in all this time and money to get it. In conclusion, raising minimum wage will not result in unemployment. Businesses, including small businesses, will end up hiring more total people if minimum wages are increased. More jobs will be available as a result of higher demand of goods and services. And last, entry-level jobs will not be harder to obtain, especially to us as college students, because we would still have the qualifications for the jobs that would be available. Thank you.
All right, the structural stuff at the beginning is all solid. You do a good job previewing what the advocate's arguments are, and as you get to the individual points in the body of the speech, you signpost them pretty well. I think on the first point, you've got good counterclaims and evidence to suggest that there is, in fact, an increase in employment as a consequence. You do have an explanation of it that it means that they reduce the number of full-time people and hire more part-time people, so total job numbers go up. I'm not exactly sure that that, in the long run, is the best argument for you to be making on this side, because it does suggest that full-time employment is going to be less viable. If that was a matter that affected poverty, for instance, on that third point, on the later point, I should say, then there would be a potential issue there. The reference that you made to previous minimum wage increases and the job increases that followed, I thought that was pretty solid information. I was a little bit confused. It sounds like there's an evaluation of the senator's statement being done by somebody, and they couldn't prove that it was false. I'm not exactly sure that that means that it proves that it's correct, but it felt like that part was not particularly relevant. If the senator's claim is made, I think that's as far as you need to go. On the issue of poverty, because there's going to be an increase in the number of people who get paid more, the CBO estimates that a number of people are going to be removed out of poverty. That's, I think, an interesting point that adds to the position that you're taking on this argument. There are always trade-offs when you do these sorts of things, and that sounds like it's an important trade-off that you would suggest as a justification that would make this worth doing. The issue about small businesses, it's interesting because every time I hear these arguments on these subjects, it's like you've got one side says, well, this is completely logical and everybody should understand that, and the other side comes back and says, no, that's wrong, and then they turn around and say almost exactly the same thing on a different position. So the opponents of minimum wage increases say, you increase the cost to small businesses, they're going to have to cut back some way. That's just simple economics. And the other side says, well, if you employ more people, put more money in their pockets, they're going to spend more money. That's just simple economics. Both of them are making basically the same kind of premise that they're using, but they're going in different directions as they're making those conclusions. Then there was a little bit of an interesting argument that suggests that people would be more likely, if they had higher wages, to take risks, so their mental health would be better, and maybe they'd open more business. That's kind of speculative, but it's I think an argument that's worth making. There's not really a lot of discussion of the advocate's evidence on any of these points. We've got a lot of counterclaims here, but they are being applied pretty directly to the claims that the advocate made. So I think that you could probably do a little bit more effort to analyze the evidence that they're presenting, as well as presenting the counterclaim, similar to what we talked about in one of the earlier speeches. You've got, I think, a very good set of counterclaims on this point. We're not always contrasting them as much as we need to with the argument that's being presented by the advocate. And then I thought your analysis on the third point was pretty effective, and you gave us a good explanation, especially one that fits with this particular audience. I think that makes a lot of sense. Presentation-wise, as I've mentioned to other people, because there's a lot of detail in some of the information you're presenting and people want to get things precise, there's a tendency to do a lot more reading. You need to look up and talk to us and just tell us what your argument is sometimes. I know that you've got the evidence there. Let's use the evidence to support your argument to us instead of just reading what the conclusion of the evidence is. And I think that you have arguments there. You just need to kind of present them a little bit more to be effective. Let's enhance our ethos a bit by doing those kinds of things. Thank you.